The air was thick with smoke as the last echoes of war faded across the shattered streets of Berlin. The year was 1945, and the world was reeling from the collapse of the Third Reich. Allied forces were sweeping through the heart of Europe. But in the aftermath of the chaos, something strange and unsettling lingered in the ruins. Among the remnants of Nazi Germany's military might was a technology unlike anything the Allies had seen before, a weapon that seemed to have come from another age. Inside the American military camp, engineers huddled over a strange object, a German V-2 rocket. It stood tall in the makeshift laboratory, its dark metal surface reflecting the dim light of the camp's lamps. The rocket, with its sleek design and strange markings, was far more advanced than anything the Allies had developed. It was a testament to the genius of Nazi engineers, and a sign that the Germans had been playing a dangerous game with technology, far ahead of the rest of the world. As the engineers peered into the rocket's inner workings, there was an eerie sense of disbelief. How could this weapon have been built in secret? How had Nazi scientists been able to push the boundaries of rocket technology so far beyond what anyone thought was possible? And perhaps most troubling of all, what would this mean for the future of warfare? For the first time, the full weight of the German threat became clear. The V-2 rocket was not just a weapon. It was a glimpse into the future. A future where warfare would no longer be fought on the ground, but in the skies above, or even beyond them. And yet, as the engineers began their examination, they felt a strange mix of awe and fear. This weapon, once thought to be nothing more than a crude experimental device, was something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The V-2 rocket's design was a masterpiece of engineering. Its guidance systems, fuel tanks, and propulsion mechanisms were a marvel of precision. The rocket's range was beyond anything the Allies had anticipated. It was capable of striking deep into enemy territory, carrying a payload powerful enough to change the course of the war. But it wasn't just the power of the rocket that left the engineers in awe. It was the fact that the Germans had built it during a time when the world was still grappling with the basic principles of rocket science. The room fell silent as the engineers exchanged looks of astonishment. For the first time, they realized that they were not just fighting against a military. They were up against a technological force that was years ahead of anything they had ever imagined. And with that realization, a wave of uncertainty washed over them. If the Germans had been able to build such a weapon in the midst of war, what would they be able to accomplish in peacetime? And more troubling still, what would the Allies be able to do in response? This moment marked the beginning of a new era. The world was about to enter a race, not just for military dominance, but for technological supremacy. The V-2 rocket was no longer just a symbol of Nazi ambition. It was a wake-up call for the world, a reminder that the future of warfare would not be determined by conventional armies, but by those who controlled the skies and the stars. As the engineers continued their work, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. They had just unlocked the door to a new frontier, one that would change the world in ways they could hardly comprehend. The question now was not if the Allies could catch up, but if they could survive long enough to do so. The flickering light from the camp lanterns cast long shadows on the concrete walls of the laboratory, where the V-2 rocket lay like a sleeping beast waiting to awaken. The engineers continued their inspection, methodically dismantling its complex systems with the precision of men who knew they were on the verge of unlocking something much larger than a weapon. In the silence of the night, the weight of their discovery was impossible to ignore. Each piece of the rocket was more advanced than the last, a testament to the unparalleled craftsmanship of the Nazi scientists who had created it in the shadows of the war. At first glance, the rocket seemed like an improbable machine, a relic of war that should have been left behind with the rubble of Berlin. But as the American engineers dug deeper, it became evident that they were staring at the future of warfare. The rocket's streamlined shape, the sophisticated guidance systems, and the innovative fuel composition all pointed to one undeniable truth. The Germans had been far ahead in the race for technological superiority. What had once seemed like an impossible feat, a weapon capable of reaching the skies, was now a tangible reality, staring the engineers in the face. The room was filled with a mix of wonder and dread. These engineers were no ordinary soldiers. They were some of the best minds America had to offer, sent to study the most advanced technologies of their time. Yet even they could hardly comprehend what they were seeing. The V-2 rocket was a technological leap that defied everything they had learned. Every part of it seemed ahead of its time, and with each turn of the wrench, they began to realize just how far Germany had come in their pursuit of military dominance. As the engineers examined the rocket's propulsion system, they were struck by its power. The V-2 was powered by a liquid fuel engine that was far more efficient than anything the Allies had produced. It could reach the edge of space before descending upon its target with deadly precision. The rocket's range was unlike anything in the American arsenal, and its payload, capable of carrying a 1-ton explosive, was enough to level entire cities. In the hands of the Germans, this weapon had been an instrument of terror, striking fear into the heart of Allied cities. But now, in the hands of the Allies, it was something more, something that could shape the course of history. The engineers moved on to the guidance system. It was here that the true genius of the V-2 was revealed. Unlike the crude targeting systems used by Allied missiles, the V-2 had an advanced autopilot mechanism that allowed it to fly with incredible accuracy over long distances. This was no simple bomb, this was a missile, capable of striking specific targets with deadly efficiency. The implications were staggering. The V-2 rocket had not only changed the way warfare was fought in the air, but it had also opened up new possibilities for the future. It was no longer just a weapon. It was the key to a new kind of warfare, one that transcended the battlefield and entered the realm of space. As the engineers took note of their findings, a sense of urgency began to settle over them. The implications of what they had uncovered were immense. If the Germans had been able to develop this weapon in secret, who was to say what other technologies they had hidden away, waiting to be discovered? The Allies were on the brink of a new kind of war, and they needed to understand what they were up against before it was too late. Outside the laboratory, the sounds of the war were still fresh in the air. The Allies had triumphed, but the shadow of the German technological threat loomed large. The rocket, once thought to be a weapon of terror, had now become the centerpiece of a new arms race, one that would lead to the development of technologies that would ultimately shape the world. The engineers had no idea what the future held, but they knew that the answers they were uncovering in the quiet of that lab would have a profound impact on the world in ways they could not yet comprehend. In the days that followed, the V-2 rocket became a symbol of the technological rivalry that would define the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union would race to harness the power of space, each side desperate to control the skies, and ultimately the stars. But all of that began in the silence of the laboratory, with the engineers staring at a weapon that had changed the rules of warfare forever. They had unlocked a new frontier, and the world would never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the examination of the German V-2 rocket continued. The camp had transformed into a hub of activity as American scientists, engineers, and military officers pored over the captured weapon with a singular obsession, understanding how the Germans had been able to craft such a marvel in the middle of a global war. The V-2 was no longer just a symbol of Nazi engineering. It had become the focal point of a new race, one that would transcend national boundaries and lead humanity into a new era of technological warfare. The engineers worked around the clock, carefully cataloging every component, analyzing each detail with a precision that mirrored the very nature of the rocket itself. It was a slow and methodical process, but with each passing day, they grew more and more astonished by what they uncovered. The more they discovered, the more they realized that the V-2 was not just a weapon. It was a window into the future. What they found was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The rocket's guidance system, while crude by modern standards, was leagues ahead of anything the Allies had been working on. The Germans had perfected the art of autonomous flight, allowing the rocket to travel hundreds of miles with deadly accuracy. The Allies had yet to master the principles of long-range missile technology, but the Germans had already accomplished it years earlier. It was as if the V-2 had been plucked from the future and dropped into the hands of a nation on the brink of collapse. As they continued to dissect the rocket, the engineers began to realize the enormity of the task before them. The knowledge contained within the V-2 was far beyond what they had been prepared for. To truly understand its potential, they would need to not only reverse engineer the rocket's technology, but also develop the infrastructure and resources required to build such a weapon on their own. It was no longer just a matter of winning the war. It was a matter of mastering the future of warfare. There was a growing sense of urgency in the air. The Cold War was on the horizon, and the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union was already taking shape. Whoever controlled the skies would control the world, and the V-2 had shown the engineers that both sides were racing toward the same goal, the ability to launch missiles capable of striking anywhere on Earth at any time. But the V-2 had also revealed something far more profound, something that none of them could have anticipated. The rocket was the beginning of space exploration. The very technology that had been developed for warfare was, in its essence, the key to sending men into the stars. As the engineers delved deeper into the complexities of the V-2, they began to see beyond the immediate military applications. They started to recognize the potential for space travel, the possibility of sending rockets into orbit and beyond. The technology of the V-2 was crude by modern standards, but it was a stepping stone, a launch pad, for the next great leap in human exploration. And yet, as they uncovered these possibilities, they were also confronted with a sobering reality. The very knowledge they were uncovering would soon be used to fuel a new kind of arms race, one that would not be fought on the ground, but in the vast emptiness of space. The room grew quieter as the engineers exchanged glances. They had come to understand the importance of what they were doing, but they also knew that the world was watching. The implications of their discoveries would ripple through history, shaping the future in ways they could not yet fathom. The V-2 rocket had been the crown jewel of Nazi innovation, and now, in the hands of the Allies, it had become the spark that would ignite a new age of technological warfare and exploration. But there was something else that lingered in the back of their minds, a question that had yet to be answered. If the Germans had been able to develop this technology in secret, what other advancements had they hidden away? What other breakthroughs were locked behind the walls of the Reich's secret laboratories? The V-2 was just the beginning, but it was clear that the Allies had a long road ahead of them. As the engineers continued their work, they began to piece together the broader implications of the V-2's design. The rocket's propulsion system, while groundbreaking, was just one part of a much larger puzzle. The Germans had already envisioned a future where missiles and rockets would dominate the battlefield, where warfare would be fought in the skies and beyond. The rocket was a glimpse into that future, and now the Allies had to decide how they would respond. The Cold War was just beginning, and the race to conquer space and dominate the skies had already begun. The V-2 rocket had provided the first glimpse of that future, but it was only a matter of time before the next breakthrough would emerge. As the engineers looked at the rocket, they realized that the true battle had not yet begun. The technology was out there waiting to be harnessed, and the world would soon discover that the next front in the war would not be fought on Earth, but in the heavens above. The days following the completion of the V-2's dissection were filled with an eerie stillness. The camp, once alive with the hum of engineers and military officers, seemed to quiet as the enormity of their task began to settle in. The engineers had unlocked the secrets of the rocket, but the true scale of what they had discovered was only beginning to unfold. The V-2, once a symbol of Nazi terror, had now become the foundation for the future of warfare. It had provided a glimpse into a world that none of them had fully understood until now. A world where missiles and rockets would dominate, where the battlefields of tomorrow would be fought in the sky and beyond. The engineers could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. They were no longer just working for the immediate goals of the war. They were working for a future that had yet to be written. The rocket had revealed a terrifying truth, that the Germans had been far ahead in the race for technological supremacy. But it also offered a terrifying question. What other technological marvels had they left behind? If this was just one of their creations, what else had they hidden in the depths of their laboratories? The implications were profound. The V-2 was just the beginning, a starting point for a new arms race that would extend beyond the reaches of Earth itself. The scientists began to grasp what had once seemed impossible. Space was no longer a realm of the unknown. It was a battleground that the Allies had to prepare for, not just in terms of military strength, but in terms of technological innovation. The V-2 was a rocket, yes, but it was also a bridge to the future, a future that would see the rise of the Cold War and the birth of the space race. For weeks, the engineers worked tirelessly, analyzing and testing the rocket's components, trying to understand its every detail. They experimented with the propulsion system, learning how to refine and improve it, while also exploring the broader implications of rocket technology. But there was something else that haunted their work. The more they discovered about the V-2, the more they realized that this technology, powerful, precise, and efficient, was something that could not be ignored. It was the key to a new kind of war. A war fought not with armies on the ground, but with missiles in the air. And the Allies had to prepare for that war. The tension among the engineers grew as the realization set in. Whoever controlled rocket technology would control the future. It was no longer just about defeating the Germans. It was about securing a future in which they held the power to shape the skies. The Soviet Union, too, had its eyes on the V-2. The race was already underway, not just for military dominance, but for technological supremacy on the world stage. Outside the laboratory, the world was changing. The war in Europe had ended, but the war for the future was just beginning. The engineers knew that their work would soon have global repercussions. The knowledge they had gained from the V-2 was already shaping the next generation of weapons. But it was also shaping something even greater, the dawn of the space age. As they gathered their findings, there was a sense of urgency in the air. They could not afford to let the Germans retain the advantage. The engineers worked late into the night, drafting blueprints for new rockets, planning missions to push the boundaries of technology even further. The knowledge from the V-2 would fuel the race to space. And soon, the rockets that had been built to destroy would be used to explore, to reach for the stars. But amid the excitement and anticipation, there was also a sense of unease. The engineers had seen the power of the V-2 firsthand. They knew what it was capable of. And now, they also knew the terrifying potential of this technology. It was no longer just about military might. The V-2 had opened the door to a new kind of power, one that could be wielded by anyone with the knowledge and resources to harness it. And that power, in the wrong hands, could change the world in ways no one could predict. As the engineers prepared their final reports and sent their findings to Washington, they were left with a sense of quiet determination. The V-2 had been the first step, but it would not be the last. The future of warfare and of humanity would be shaped by what they had learned in those quiet days in the laboratory. The rocket was a weapon of destruction, yes, but it was also a symbol of something greater. It was the dawn of a new era, one that would see mankind reach beyond the Earth itself. The V-2 had shown them the future, and now it was up to them to decide what to do with it. The world was on the brink of a new chapter, and the engineers knew that they had just opened the first page. They had witnessed the birth of something far more powerful than any weapon, a force that would define the next century of human history. And in that quiet laboratory, Amidst the fading echoes of war, they had discovered the key to the future. The V-2 rocket had not only changed the course of the war, it had changed the course of the world. And now, with that knowledge in their hands, the engineers knew that the battle for the future was just beginning. The space race had begun, and there was no turning back.